we can get started with our project for the month. So, fun project. I'm excited. Kind of a new format here. I'm adding a little bit to Fusion. Every once in a while, I add a little bit to the class. So now I've got slides. Slides are cool. And I made the project ahead of time. So over the next like 4 weeks, we're going to be building or designing, and I'm going to print another one because this is just the prototype, but we're going to design and make this thing right here. So some problems get solved by just shooting lots of money at it. If you've got a boat or a house, you know what I'm talking about, but you just have to like shoot large amounts of cash at an object in order to make it work. So this is the tool for that. So I've got my cash loaded up here, and here I'm just gonna shoot large amounts of cash at the project, and hopefully problem solved, right? That's how things work. So that's how you use this tool. And now that you saw it, I'll show you a little bit more close up here. So this is it right here. This is version 1. We're going to be making version 2, but it'll have the same kind of features. So we're going to start by this time around. We're going to be making hopefully the roller and possibly the tray. But today I'd like to try to get this roller done. And then maybe we'll get into the tray, but we can always save that for next week if we run out of time. I know people don't like it when I try to... Mike, I promise I'm not going to shove this entire tray into the last 10 minutes of class. Because I've done that to you before, and it's not cool. It's not cool. So that's one of the changes we're making in 2022. All right, so... like I said, we'll do the roller, we'll do the tray, we'll do the body probably last because that is the most complicated part here. And the body is all done with surfaces, and it's like got this overmolded rubber over the top. We'll get into making the overmold. It's gonna be fun. It's cool. I like it. But for today, our goal. I got cash everywhere, just kind of hanging onto my screens. Today, our goal is we are going to, let's see, I'm not used to all my new fanciness here. We're going to use the following tools. So, these are some pretty basic tools. This Emboss Tool may be a new tool for you guys here, but I know some of us have used, all of us I think have used the extrude tool. Most of us I think have used user parameters, but this is a feature that I really like. This Emboss Tool will probably be the main new tool. If you got a new tool in this list, this Emboss Tool would be the main new one. And then if we get to the tray, we'll get to this DXF thing, but like I said, we may not get there. So without further ado, let me stop showing off my cool slides that I made, and let's actually make Fusion-y stuff. So I'm going to start a new document. So I'm going to come up here to my new design tab up here in Fusion 360, and I'm going to select it. Now each one of these parts, let's say, is going to be separated in its own component. So you can see here in this file here, I've got my components broken up, and what that does is it makes it a little bit more neat. So here, this tray is just a handful of commands down here that made this tray, and it just makes it a little bit more organized when you're going to have a project that has a lot of parts in it. So separating them up into individual components is one of the keys to keeping this thing organized. So with that being said, we're going to start by creating a new component. So I'm going to do that by clicking on Create here, and then I'm going to come down here to this New Component option, which is the very top of the menu. I'm going to click that New Component option, And now I'm going to name my component. So this is going to be the roller. That's what I called it. I guess it's the mechanism that shoots out the cash. It's the gripper, I guess would also be a name for it. The whatever cash shooting mechanism, I guess you could call it that too. But what's that?
The Scrooge.
The Scrooge, yep. You can call whatever makes sense in your brain hole. I support your own naming rights. All right, so I'm going to click OK. So now we've got our component here. And the other thing that I want to point out and make sure we're all being diligent about, when we're going to have a file that has multiple components in the inside of it, these radio buttons become really important. So if I'm going to work on my roller component, I got to make sure that that radio button is highlighted. When I go to create a sketch or to extrude an object, if this radio button next to roller is not highlighted, so for example, if I highlight this component, which is our main document component, when I create a sketch, it'll create the sketch in this component instead of in this component. Does that make sense? So be diligent about making sure the correct component is selected as we're going through here, and I'll leave that up to you to be diligent about on your end at home and here in person. So all right, so we got our roller component selected. The next thing I want to do here is I want to start by entering in some of the parameters that we're going to use, and that's going to be in that user parameter option that I talked about at the beginning of class here. So if I click on the modify menu and I come down to change user parameters, it's the penultimate menu item in that modify menu. Now I get this window here. So a user parameter is a variable that you can define ahead of time. So normally when we're making a sketch, we would say, hey, I want this to be 2 inches by 3 inches. If you have set up some user parameters just by clicking on this user parameters plus button here on that window that opens, you can now define a variable. So for example, we're going to have a motor, and that's going to have a diameter. And my motor diameter is 1.5 inches. And I say OK. Now, instead of specifying that 1.5 inches when we're drawing our motor diameter circle, we can just type in motor diameter. And what that'll allow us to do is, for a few things that are kind of flexible at the beginning of our drawing here. So for example, I don't have my motor in my hand, so I'm not measuring it. I don't have a bearing in hand, so I'm not measuring it. So I like to enter those as user parameters. That way when I actually get my motor and my bearing, it's real easy for me to go here, just open up this user parameters dialog box, change this expression to whatever my motor actually is when I measure it with my calipers. And that saves me some steps and from having to go back and trying to find where I made that sketch and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So we've got a couple of user parameters we need here. The motor diameter, I'm going to enter in 2 measurements for a bearing. We're going to have a bearing OD, and we're going to have a bearing ID. So an outer diameter for our bearing is going to be 2.285. And again, this is the bearing that I had, so it'll be easy for you to change this to the bearing that you have once you have that bearing. And now the third and final user parameter that we're going to add here is our bearing ID, or the inner diameter of our bearing, which is going to be 1.76. And I'll just kind of pause and leave these measurements up here for a second, just in case you guys at home, following along at home, didn't get those. I guess the exact dimension is not super crucial. That's part of the thing about this user expression is we're entering in a ballpark dimension now. and then you're going to go get your bearing, and you're going to go get your motor, and then you'll enter in the dimension later. But this is a good ballpark to start in, because it was my actual motor and my actual bearing. So, all right, cool. So now I'm going to click on OK here, and we can create a sketch and start utilizing some of those variables that we just entered. So I'm going to come up here to the Create menu, and I'll come down to Create Sketch. I'm going to create a sketch on the right side here. So I'm going to use my navigation cube up in the top right hand corner and just kind of make sure I can see that right side really easily. For me, it's the side between my blue and my green axis, between my Z and my Y axis here. And I'm going to click on that to start my sketch. And I am going to place the center of my circle. So I'm going to come up here to the Create menu, and I'm going to choose a circle and a center diameter circle. I'm going to place that right at the origin. So right where those two axes collide, where they meet each other at 0, 0, I'm going to start that. And now this first circle is going to be my motor. So if I could type in 1.5, but I'm not going to do that because I made a user parameter. You can see when I start typing in MO, then I get my motor diameter user parameter there. And in order to select that, I think I can click on it. I can click on it, or you can hit enter. So I always encourage people to let go of your mouse and use the keyboard at this point. Use the force of your keys. And so if you hit the enter key, once it starts typing that for you, it'll give you your motor diameter and place that dimension. And now I can hit enter one more time, and that actually places that circle there. All right, so I've got my motor. Let's place the inner and outer diameter of our bearing here the exact same way. So I'll come up to the Create menu and grab my center diameter circle here. And I'll place that center point at the exact same center point I placed my first circle. And this time I'm going to type in my bearing inner diameter, and then one more circle. Also, the center diameter circle is the C key on your keyboard, in case you were curious. And this last circle that I'm placing, I guess that's a lie. It's not the last circle. It's not nearly the last circle we're going to be making in this class, but nonetheless, it is the next circle we are making. All right. Something that you can do here to clean things up, these measurements kind of get on top of each other, and I kind of like to take my measurements and space them out. Inevitably, you're going to be looking at this sketch again, and it's nice when things can look a little prettier, especially if you should treat yourself good. It's 2022. Treat yourself good and make your sketches look nice. All right. So we've got our bearing, we've got our motor. The next circle we need to make is kind of the outer diameter of our roller. So if I come down to, let's see, we'll grab the circle tool one more time. Circle, center diameter circle here. Now the outer diameter of our roller, it definitely needs to be bigger than the outer diameter of our bearing. And, you know, I suppose something that will be interesting here is instead of making this circle just like a set unit of inches here, we could make it based from the outer diameter of our bearing. So, what do I mean when I say that? So, if I, from the Modify menu, choose this offset option, instead of making a new circle, if I choose this offset option here, and now as the sketch curve that I want to make an offset from, I select this outer diameter of my bearing here, and now I specify a size, like 1/4 of an inch. That feels good to me. Seems like a good amount. And then we say OK. So now this outer diameter of our roller is going to be determined by our bearing. So when we get our bearing and it's a different size, we won't have to go and change this dimension in case the bearing is bigger than it. It'll just automatically be, in fact here, I will demonstrate that. You guys don't have to do this at home, but if I shrink this down so it's a little bit more manageable and you can see things all at the same time. And now this bearing outer diameter, if I change this, for me, if I change it to 3, again, you guys don't have to do this at home or here, you can see it automatically made my outermost wall of my roller larger. So that is a nice way to do that. All right. Now, I think we are done right now. We are. Got our motor, we've got our bearing, we've got our outer. Yes. All right, so now I can say finish sketch. So, I'm going to harp on this a lot. In fact, let me show you a best practice of what not to do. So, here is my first attempt at drawing this project, right? And here you can see I've done a terrible, it takes a lot of sketches to make this up, and I did not organize this at all, and this is a nightmare to look at now. It's terrible. So don't do that. It's much nicer if you will be much happier with yourself if your project looks like this. So this is going to be a key here that we harp on over and over again, is like organization and naming your sketches, keeping everything in the right component, naming your bodies. I may have even named my construction planes here, so now I'm like nice and organized. This makes me happy to look at this drawing, and your drawing should make you happy. It's 2022. Things should make you happy now. All right, so now we've got our sketch here that we can name. This is our roller side view. Whatever makes sense to you. Eventually we're gonna extrude this out and it's gonna be our roller. I guess it's kind of hard to tell right now, but yeah, that's where we're at. All right, so let me do a little check-in with you folks at home. How are you guys doing? Oh, it's where's my? Is it that one? Yeah, that one. How are you guys doing at home? Are you following along? You're good? Tom, Dad, Mike, you guys are good? Cool, thumbs up. All right, beautiful. All right, so let's keep going then. And you're good here, right?
Yes.
Sweet, right on. You can't even see the folks at home. They're here.
I believe you.
You just think I'm talking to the screen over here. It's like, what is going on?
I believe other people show up.
All right, cool. So now we can extrude out some of these items. Let's start with our motor. So I'm going to come down here to the Create menu, and I'm going to come over to Extrude, this Extrude option. And I'm going to choose this little motor right here. And I'm wondering if I want to do this or not. We're just going to extrude it out one way. Are we? Yeah, we're going to extrude it out one way. All right. So I'm just going to extrude that straight out. And I don't have my motor with me, but I want to say that my motor was like 1.75 inches, something like that. The key here is your motor has to be less than 2.5 inches. If your motor is longer than 2.5 inches, it ain't gonna fit. You will have a failure to chooch. And my dimension is going in a negative direction. It's up to you whether you want to do it this way or not. It doesn't really matter. Here, for some reason, 1.1 inch towards me is positive and away from me is negative. But whichever way you go that makes you happy, I support your choices. And we can just roll with that. So 1.75 or negative 1.75. And then I'm going to say OK. All right, now we've got a bodies folder here and a body to name. So I'll come over here to my bodies folder and I'll go ahead and name that my motor. And I'll say OK. All right, and now I can extrude out my bearing. So I'm going to come up to the Create menu again, come down to the Extrude option. My bearing is this kind of middle ring there. It's that ring that kind of hovers in the middle there. I believe my bearing was 1/4 inch. Negative 1/4 inch for me, because we want to make sure that we're going the same direction with all these things. So if you went positive your first time, go positive your second time. I mean, you should always go positive, unless it's a test, in which case you want it to be negative, right? I mean,
that kind. Okay.
yeah, it depends on the test. Sometimes you want your test to be positive. You want your attitude to be positive.
Yes.
No matter what. Whether your test is negative or positive, your attitude should be positive. All right. So now we've got the next body extruded out here. This is our bearing. Our sweet bearing. And now, the next thing that we want to do here, should we make our bearing look nice? Let's do that. Let's make our bearing look like a bearing. So, in order to make our bearing look like a bearing, we're going to need to, I'm going to hide this sketch. I'm going to hide the sketch because I don't want to accidentally click on it, because I'm going to need to create a sketch on the face of this bearing, and it'll be real easy for me to create the sketch on this sketch if I don't hide it. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that sketch just by clicking on the little eyeball next to it. And now if I come down here to the Create menu and I choose to create a sketch, and I create it right on the face of this bearing, you can make it on either side. Either side of this would be a fine option to make your sketch on. And now I can make the walls of my bearing, right? So we're going to do that just the same way we made the very outer circle of our roller, is just by clicking on the Modify menu and then choosing this Offset option. Something that's nice that Fusion does when you create a sketch on a surface like this is it automatically kind of projects the lines of the body underneath it. So I have the lines of these two circles here that kind of exist, that you can use to offset. And if I just bring in the walls of my bearing, negative 0.05, that's probably a decent bearing wall. This is one of those measurements that it should look right, but it doesn't need to be right. So I'm going to do that for the inner wall too. So in the Modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and grab this Offset option here. I'm going to highlight my inner line here. That's my inner bearing inner diameter and 0.05. Now, this is another place where you may need to switch your negatives and your positives. So sometimes fusion goes in, sometimes it goes out for positives, but you know, just kind of visually look at it and make sure it looks good. And I'm going to say OK. And now we're done using this sketch here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this Finish Sketch icon. And we've got a sketch over here in our Sketches folder that I can name. This is my bearing walls. So it's where I drew the walls of my bearing here. And for the next trick to making our bearing look a little nicer here, this is all kind of cosmetic, but I like it when we have a nice looking drawing. So I'm going to, from the Create menu, go ahead and grab my Extrude tool. So the first couple times we used the Extrude tool, we were making new bodies. And this time, when we use the Extrude tool, we're going to be using it to cut from an existing body. So if I take my arrow and I move it backwards into my part, you can see it turns red here. And I just need to go back like 0.02, let's say. That's probably too much. 1.5. Again, this is cosmetic, so we're just making something that looks like a bearing. Not super crucial, but we're just going to extrude it backwards into our part. And you can see when we do that, it changes our operation from new body, and it turns it to cut. And that's what we want to do here. We want to cut away from our bearing here. And then I'm going to say OK. Alright, I'm going to turn off my bearing walls sketch, just because it kind of gets in the way and it makes it a little bit more difficult to see. Now we've got one side of our bearing wall, but the other side of our bearing will look the same way. And there is a way for us to mirror the thing that we just did over onto the other side. So we could make another sketch and make the sketch on the other side of our bearing and do the exact same thing, but that's a lot of steps, and I'm lazy, so we have a different way to do it. So in order to mirror this operation or this feature over to the other side, we first need a plane to mirror it across. So I need to create a plane that is right in between this face and I gotta zoom in, and this face right here. And if we look in our Construct menu, we will see that there is a mid-plane option. We're going to use this a bunch of times throughout the course of this project. This mid-plane option is super handy, so because we're going to do quite a bit of mirroring. So if I choose this mid-plane option here, I suppose I should have made this one of the icons that we highlight, but I wasn't thinking. It's my first time. All right, so I'm going to click the two planes that I want to make a mid-plane between. So I can either click on this ring here or this ring here. Either one of those will be a fine option. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my outer one, and then as the second plane I'm clicking on, I'm rotating around to the other side of my bearing, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that face right there, and you can see it gave me a plane right in the middle, which is great, and I'm going to say OK. Alright, now that we've got that plane made, let's name it. We're naming stuff, keeping stuff organized. So in our construction menu, we've got our bearing mid-plane. There we go. We're even naming our construction documents. Alright, cool. Alright, so now we can do that mirror operation the whole reason we made this plane was so we could choose from our Create menu the mirror option. if I choose this mirror option, instead of a mirror type of faces, we want to make a mirror type of features. Now, you can do this two ways. So I'm going to choose the features option. A feature is one of these items down here in our timeline in the bottom. So all of these are features that we could mirror over to the other side. So this extrude here is where we extrude it in for the side walls of our bearing here. So I'm going to choose that as the feature that I'm going to mirror, and then if I choose this mirror plane, if I click on that little select button and then choose the mirror plane, I can either pick the mid plane here in my drawing view, or I can click on the bearing mid plane in my construction folder in my browser. Either one of those is a fine option. And now if I look at the other side, I'm going to say OK, and it went ahead and mirrored that right over, which is real great. Another option that you could do, just as a side note, if you wanted to, you could choose to mirror faces, and then what you would have to do is you'd have to come in here and you'd have to select. Oh, can you? Can you do that? I thought you could. Control. You got to hold the control button down while you click on multiple faces. And if I hold the control button down and click on all three of those faces that kind of make up those interior bits there, I believe, yeah, I get the same thing. So just two ways to skin that cat. You can either choose all three of the faces that make up a feature, or you can just choose the feature that you want to that you're doing. It could be that the shape that you're making, that you're mirroring, is made up of more than one feature, and it may be easier to click on the faces. But options. All right, so I'm going to turn off my construction plane that is my bearing mid plane, and I'm going to zoom out here a little bit, and we've got a nice looking bearing now. The next step here is going to be our roller. So if I turn back on my roller side view sketch, so in my sketches folder, that was the very first sketch we made, was the one that I called roller side view. It's the one that features like all of those circles. And now from this sketch, I want to extrude out one more item. So I'll go ahead and I'll click on the Create menu. We may do two more items. That's kind of on the side. Alright, if I choose Extrude here, the item that I'm going to extrude now is kind of this outer roller. So that very outer circle, in between the very outer circle and our bearing, that little 1/4 inch, I believe, offset we made, I'm going to extrude this back, and we're going to go a distance of 2.5 negative for me. Is that right? It seems real big. All right, 2.5. So our money, our cash in this country, in the land of where cash is king and dead presidents live on our dollar bills, they are 2.61 inches wide. So it will need to be less than that. I made my roller almost the full width of the money, but I suppose you could have it be less than that. Oh, and that's why it looks so wide, because mine is 5.5. This needs to be 2.5. That looks much better. All right. So 2.5 inches in a negative direction, and instead of join here, now it wants to join because it's directly touching our bearing body here. So there are two ways to avoid that. One way would be to change our operation from join to new body, and then it will make a new body for us. The other option is if we, over here in our browser, if we just turn off whatever body it's touching, it will not join to anything, I think. I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And, yep, famous last words. But yes, it did indeed not do that. So it defaulted back to new body because the bearing was turned off. So you can do either one of those things. You can say new body, or you can turn off whatever body it is touching. And then I'm going to say okay. Alright, so you guessed it, we've got a last body over here in our bodies folder that we can give a name to. And we're going to call this the roller, because this is the thing that what's going to roll around our motor and our bearing. Alright, now if we rotate around to the other side of our roller, I'm going to turn off my roller side view here, and I'm going to focus on just the end of the roller here. The end of this roller just needs to get closed off, so I'm going to come to my Create menu, and I'm going to choose to create a sketch, and I'm going to create that sketch on the opposite end of the roller that I had been using. So all of my previous sketches came off of this side of my roller, and now this sketch is going to start over here on this side of my roller. This is the part of the roller that's going to attach to our motor shaft eventually. So that's what we're actually going to start to draw right here. Now, I'm going to just put a placeholder in there for now. So I'm going to come up here to the Create menu and then choose Circle. And I'm just going to put a center diameter circle in here. And I'm going to place it right at the center here of our circles. And I'm just going to make it 1/4 of an inch. This is just a placeholder. So again, whatever motor you get, the motor that I got has got a weird end on it. You can't even see it in here. It's got a weird spiky end on it. Some motors have like a flat shaft thing going on, but we just need a placeholder in here for now. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw in that little circle and say Finish Sketch. And now I've got a last, that's not true, an additional sketch over here to name. So this is going to be our motor shaft. Maybe mount, motor shaft mount. That makes sense. Suppose you could like actually draw whatever motor shaft, and then you could also make the shaft of the motor. Oh, there we go. There's the... Is that the Shaft theme song I hear playing in the background?
Yes.
You damn right. Okay, cool. Now we're going to get a YouTube takedown notice. Thanks. No, it's all right. As my father, you're allowed to do whatever you want in this class because you're my dad. So that's just a rule that everybody else has to live with. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and extrude out the end of this roller here. So kind of cap it off. From my Create menu, I'm going to grab this Extrude option here, and I'm going to choose this end here of my motor, and I'm going to just drag this inward just like a 1/4 of an inch. So that'll be enough to attach my motor. Will grab a hold of this. The reality is this needs to extrude inward until it reaches the shaft of your motor. So depending on the length of your motor and the length of the shaft that comes off of it, this will need to extend inward to meet that. So But join is a fine option for us for now, and I'm just going to say okay. All right, so we've got a roller, we've got our shaft mount. The last thing that we need to do here in our roller is to create the gripping surface that is on the front of this. And what I'd like to do is to make a pattern of some sort on this surface that goes around the entire roller. And as you know, we can't create a sketch on a curved surface. However, we can use a tool from the Create menu called the Emboss Tool to take a flat sketch and kind of emboss it into this curved surface. In order to do that, we first need to have a sketch. In order to have a sketch, we first need to have a plane. So let's go ahead and look in our Construct menu for the proper kind of plane to make that would allow us to make a sketch near this near this circle or this cylinder. And I thought the best plane to make here is this tangent plane. So if we choose this tangent plane option and then specify as the face that we're making a plane tangent to this outermost diameter of our roller here. Now the angle doesn't really make much difference. It is kind of interesting to note though that if you need this plane that you're making on a tangent to something to be at the same angle as some other plane for whatever reason, you can choose a reference plane, so that's kind of cool. We don't, but there's options here in this, or we can type in an amount of degrees, or I can make it 45, not 450, but 0 is fine for me. So I'm just going to say okay here. Now we've got a plane to name. All right, so over in my construction folder, I've got this plane that I can call my, I don't know, roller texture, because we're going to make our roller texture on here. And on that plane, I'm going to create a sketch. So I'll come down here to Create, and then Create Sketch, and I'm going to choose that roller texture plane to make that sketch on. Now, before I start here, I really like to have the edges of this roller defined, or kind of on this sketch. I'd like to have a line on either side of this sketch that kind of represents the outer boundaries of my roller. And to do that, I'm going to need to come up to the Create menu and choose from the Project Include option, the Project option. So Create, and then scroll all the way down to Project Include, and then choose this Project option. It's also the P key on your keyboard. And I'm going to choose as a selection filter just specified entities. So this little purple icon that's specified entities is good for me, because I just need the outer 2 lines. So I don't need the whole body. I just need the line on either side of the roller that represents either side of the roller there. And then I can say OK. So now I've got 2 lines. I think maybe the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. So I'll come down here to Create, and then Rectangle, and then I'm going to choose a 2-point rectangle. If I zoom in here to my object, if I hover over one of these endpoints and just kind of move my mouse off to the side, you can see I get a little blue dashed line. And what that's telling me is it's kind of like going to be in line with that point. I suppose I could do it wrong. Let's do it wrong, because then I can show you a thing. So I'm going to click off and purposefully not put it in the right place. And I'm going to come over to the other side, and again, I'm just kind of placing this point arbitrarily. I am going to enter in a height measurement. So I'm going to start with 5, knowing that I may need to change that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter here. Now I did not specify a width measurement, and that's because I want my width to be determined based on how far this line is from my projected line and this line is from this projected line here. So I can do that by giving it some dimension constraints. So from the create menu here, if I come down here to the very bottom option, it's the D key on the keyboard, it's the sketch dimension option. If I click on this little dot, I suppose I could do this line too. If I click on this line here or this dot as the first thing I click on, and then the second thing I click on is the line that's closest to it, and then I move my mouse downward, you can see I've got a dimension that I can place now. And if I click and place that dimension, now I can give that dimension an actual dimension. So, like for example, I could do 3/16, which seems like a good amount to me right now, 3/16 of an inch. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. I'm going to do that same thing to the other side. So from my create menu, I'll come down and grab my sketch dimension tool here. I will click on my 2 lines that I want to dimension from each other and place that dimension and give it 3/16 as a unit, not unit, as a value, and hit enter. And there we go. So you can see that because I did not enter in a dimension for this rectangle, it just went ahead and shrank it down. Now, if I would have entered in a dimension for this rectangle, the width of this rectangle, once I tried to add in this other dimension here, it would have sworn at me and said, hey, your sketch is over constrained, and you would have need to went in and just highlight one of those dimensions and delete it, and then you could act as normal, act like we just did. Okay, now the last thing that we're going to do here is we're going to line up this bottom line at the bottom of our we're going to line up this point with this point. So from the constraints menu, if I choose this horizontal vertical constraint, what that will do is it will allow me to either choose this line or this point, and this point here, I guess either one of these points. Oh, constraint has already been applied to the selected object. That's interesting. It's swearing at me. It won't let me do it. Let's try it one more time. Constraint has already been applied to the selected object. So I've got a constraint here. I'm going to delete it because I don't want it. I'm going to click delete, and I'm going to try that one more time. That horizontal vertical constraint, that line, and that line. There we go. I do have to click on the points. So maybe click on this point, and then it lined it up nicely. Now I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. And I'm going to spin this around a little bit here. Oh, we got a sketch name. This sketch is our texture. I'm Right now there's not much texture on it, but we did that because, actually I wonder if I can, nope. So there I'm sure is a way to determine the radius of your circle based on its diameter, or you can just guess and check, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to come up to this create menu. I'm going to scroll down to this emboss option that I mentioned, that I kind of teased at the beginning of class here as our new feature. I'm going to highlight the sketch profile that I'm going to emboss here, and then the face that I'm going to emboss that in, which is our roller surface here. And now I want to go actually inward. So I want to deboss, technically. I'm going to deboss into this surface, cutting it away. And the amount that I'm going to cut it away, so it was, we made our thing a 1/4 inch thick. So this could be -0.1 would be fine, or 1/8. Make it a nice round number. Just do 1/8 inch. And then I'm going to say OK. And I'm actually going to look up whatever that measurement is, because it'll save us time. So we can see that it did indeed emboss, but it did not go all the way around. And I'd really like it to go all the way around. So in order to do that, we're going to edit our texture sketch. So if I right click on it and say edit sketch, and then while you do that, actually while I do a little check-in, how are you guys doing at home? We got like 10 more minutes or so in class here. Still doing good? Cool.
Yep.
Good.
Circumference of a circle, Carl, is pi times diameter.
Mike, you're a saint. I knew you would know that answer. Okay, so pi times our diameter. And our diameter is, so let me grab my calculator here.
1/4 inch offset plus the diameter.
So it's 2.785 times pi
Yes.
times 3.14 would be 8.7449. So when we go back to this sketch and edit it, we want to change this 5 inches to 8.77449. Now if your bearing is different, if you decided to make your bearing a different size for whatever reason, then this measurement will be different. And the way that I found the diameter of this circle really easily is just if I click on it and highlight it in my drawing view, down in the bottom right hand corner, it gives me the diameter of that edge. It rounds it to 3 decimal places, so this may not be as accurate as it could be, but and now if I go ahead and say finish sketch, oh yeah, sure enough, we got just a sliverette left. So we need to add just a smidge more here, so I'm going to edit that sketch one more time. I'm going to make this, let's make it 0.75. It was pretty close to 0.75 as it is. Nope, that's not it. Let's make it 0.76. Oh, see, now it gave me a warning. Sketch profiles create an intersecting body. Okay, so that was too long. Let's make it 0.755. Yeah, there it's intersecting again. You know what? We might call 0.75 good enough. I think we're going to call 0.75 good enough. call that good enough. Let's say finish sketch. And now, the last thing that I want to show you how to do here before we wrap up is I'd like to add some actual texture to this. So the first thing we did was to remove some area because my roller is actually going to be made of rubber. And we'll kind of talk about overmolding later, but if we go and edit this sketch, now what I chose to go with is a series of squares. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my rectangle tool, create, and then rectangle, and then I'm going to choose this set 2-point rectangle. I'm going to just kind of place my rectangle somewhere down here and then move my mouse up and place my second corner. This is just kind of a visual thing, so I'm just kind of making something that looks nice-ish. So if I make that's about a square, that looks pretty good. And now I'm gonna offset this square. So I'll come up and grab from my offset menu, or my modify menu, the offset command. We'll offset that square inwards a little bit. A nice thick, like 0.08 or so. That seems fine to me. And now in this square, I'm going to challenge you guys to draw something. So I made like a banana, and I made like a cherry. I guess I was channeling what I thought when I think about this roller is like a like when you see a slot machine and it's got all those icons of a slot machine. You know, there's a cherry, there's a number 7, there's like a pile of coins or whatever. I'm gonna challenge you guys to fill this square with something that you feel interests you. So for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and grab, just to fill this space, I'll grab my spline tool. Actually, I'm gonna make it with a bunch of arcs. If I grab my 3-point arc tool here, and I kind of start to make a banana shape with my 3-point arc tool. I guess a banana really kind of comes up like it would follow that arc closely. And then the top of my banana is also going to be an arc, and this is kind of the last of the little stem there. And then here is the bottom of my banana. And then I'll just cap it off with a final arc there. And then I'm going to say finish sketch. And now I'm going to emboss this again. So I'm actually going to emboss it a couple more times. So from my create menu, I'm going to choose this emboss option again. Now this time the items that I want to emboss are kind of like all these things again. So it's everything that makes up this roller here. I'm sorry, not this roller, this sketch. The faces that I want to emboss are this. It's this face that I set back the first time. And this time I want it to come outward. So it's weird that we made it go in and only to make it go out again. I'm going to turn... Can I turn off my roller? Gosh, I can't turn off my roller. How did I do that? How did I do that, Carl? I know what I did. I'm going to click cancel here. Instead of embossing that, what we actually need to do is to get our rubber back on our roller here, we need to extrude it. So from the create menu, if we come down here to this extrude option, and if I pick one of my walls on either side of the inner walls, kind of on either side of this roller, and extrude this out, I can actually click on the opposite wall here and it will extrude it to that wall. And instead of join, I'm going to say new body. So now I'm making a new body here. This is the rubber part of our roller. I'm going to say okay. We're almost done. I'm just going to go like maybe two extra minutes over time here. So hopefully everybody's still doing okay. And now we've got a body to name. Let's go ahead and name our body. This body is it's the roller texture. And now we can choose the emboss option. So I'm going to come up here to the create menu. I'm going to come all the way down in the middle to emboss. And now I'm going to pick the little fake drawing I made and the square. Now if you didn't make your drawing yet, it's totally cool. Just do your square. And the face that I'm going to emboss it from is that face that we just made. And we're going to make it come out. I'm going to make mine come out. And in reality, you need to make yours come out too, because it needs to be proud of the side, otherwise it won't grab our money. And it only needs to come out just a little bit. So, like 0.05. I'm sure would be just plenty to come out, and just needs to come out just to give some grip to our money as it sits inside of our tray. And I'm just going to say okay. So the challenge I'm going to leave you guys, if you choose to accept it, is to make these squares, these little squares, make your own little icons to put in them, make them go around the whole thing. I'll give you a hint. If we come down back here to where we were making that sketch and say edit sketch, the thing that I would do first before I make all my little interior pieces is to create all of my squares that go up the length of this whole thing, right? And the way I would choose to do that is with my rectangular pattern option. So if you've never used the rectangular pattern option before, this is a good opportunity to do so. It says how to use it and what the tool does kind of in this tool tip that we get when we hover over it. And you can use this rectangular pattern option to make a pattern of this square that we made here. This is kind of like, it's not really a square, I guess it's a rectangle, to make that pattern go all the way up the front here. And then in each one of those different squares you can draw a different thing, or you could just make a cash symbol in all of them. I leave it up to you. Like I said, my inspiration was kind of it was a slot machine. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So that's it for this week. Next week we will do the tray part of things. So next week we'll get to the tray, which is, so we drew our roller this week. Next week we'll do the tray, and then also next week I'll talk about coloring these parts, because I think that's become an essential part of my workflow in keeping things organized, both with a folder structure over here and naming things, and also like visually organized, so everything's not just all the same color, because you know you can't even tell that this is separate parts. So We'll color the things, and we'll make our tray next week. It's gonna be fun. And then I'm gonna shoot more money at you, maybe. It's gonna be great. You guys have any questions before we wrap up? No? Shaking your head, Mike? How'd you do?
I'm following you. I'm just watching what you're doing. I only have one screen to work with.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think my dad is in the same boat. He kind of like, tries to pick up a few things in the recording and then goes back later and maybe walks through it. So you can always like pause and. There you go. Excellent. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you as always, boss.
All right, have a good one, Mike.
Happy New Year to all.
Bye.
Bye. We'll see you later.
Hey, I'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Yeah. I'm thinking about making this virtual only again. How do you feel about that?
Huh. Like for COVID reasons?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to be the
The one guy.
obligation that